Although historians use sources to find out about the past, some sources are more useful than others. However, the questions won't ask you to judge whether a source is useful or useless in its own right. They'll ask you whether a source is useful or useless in helping you to find out something. These are some of the questions you should ask yourself. Where does the source come from? Who made it? Why was it made? How reliable is the source? What does this biased source tell us? Here's another example question. How useful is this eyewitness account for finding out about how soldiers reacted to the fighting on the Western Front? As you watch the next clip, think about how you'd answer the question. Then pause the tape and make some notes.
I saw one of our battalion lads laid out on the ground on top of the parapet with his legs up in the air. And I said, what are you trying on? He said, well, I'm trying to get a wound if I can in my legs. He said, there's quite a bit of machine gunning going on and a few rifle fires. He said, I thought I might get a bullet through my leg and get home to Blighty, which of course meant to get home to England. He said, I can't stand any more. I'm absolutely at the far end. I'm done for. I said, we all feel like that. He says, no, you don't feel like that. I said, we do, every one of us. But we have a job to do. We're going to do it.
So how did you get on? Let's look at the question. How useful is this eyewitness account for finding out about how soldiers reacted to the fighting on the Western Front? To answer this, think about the words of Walter Hare. Think about who he was, what he saw, what he said about himself and the other soldiers. It may help you to make two lists. The first one should show the uses of this source, and the second, a list of the problems of using this source. Pause here to answer, and then continue to hear some suggested answers. In the useful column, you could have written that he was there. He speaks not just about the soldier trying to get a Blighty one, but about himself. He says he was desperate but had a job to do, and so helps explain how they stuck it. Under the problems column, you could write that he's an old man now, he may have misremembered, he may not be typical, his evidence may therefore not be completely reliable. But don't write Walter Hare off because of the problems you've identified. Examiners don't want you to say simply how wonderful a source is or how utterly unreliable and useless it is. For good grades, examiners want to see balanced answers. Find points to make on both sides. Here are 3 different attempts at answering this question, each scoring very different marks. It is useful because the man tells us about how another soldier tried to get wounded so that he could get sent home. If you answer the question in a similar way to this person, you'll probably be heading for a grade F. This eyewitness fought in the war and is describing something he saw himself. It is likely to be quite reliable. He tells how one man was so terrified that he wanted to get a Blighty one, which meant being sent home. However, it was a long time ago and he may have misremembered. If you answer the question in a similar way to this student, you'll probably be heading for a grade C. The speaker was an eyewitness who fought in the war, so his story could be reliable. Although its usefulness for finding out about soldiers in general is limited because it is only one incident and so may not be typical. He also says how he told the man that we have a job to do. This is useful for understanding how most men put up with the situation. If you answer the question in a similar way to this student, you'll be heading for the highest grade, an A. It's important that you understand why these three attempts at the same question were heading for such different grades. Let's take a really biased source. As you watch the following clip, think about this question. How useful is this source for telling us about Stalin's collectivization of Soviet agriculture?
As part of the propaganda for collectivization, Eisenstein made his film The Old and the New. The toil of the individual peasant pulling his own old plough was to be transformed by the new tractors brought to the collective farm. But the peasants' reaction in the Ukraine wasn't jubilation at all. Instead, there was sullen resistance to the collective plans. The peasants were suspicious. They saw the tractors from Moscow as outside interference, Russians meddling in Ukrainian affairs.
How useful is this source for telling us about Stalin's collectivization of Soviet agriculture? This clip is clearly biased, a propaganda film. If you're not sure why, rewind the tape and have another look at it. If you couldn't tell that this clip is biased from the style of the film, you could tell it from the attribution. Attribution means information about a historical source, telling you the circumstances in which it was produced, e.g. date, place, author, etc. Your list of things you've seen in the clip should include heroic peasants, tractors crushing fences, powerful machinery, simple slogans, dramatic music. But what do you know about collectivization? You may know that the peasants were very uncooperative and that many were opposed to the collectivization program. The state grain requisitions led to an artificial famine in 1933. So the film was extremely misleading, but don't write it off. It's tempting to say it's completely useless, but a propaganda film like this is extremely useful. Why might such a film have been made in the first place? What can that tell us about collectivization? Stalin needed to get support for collectivization. This clip shows us the impression he wanted to give. It's very useful, therefore, in telling us about his motives and his means of persuasion. Another type of source examiners love to use is cartoons. Remember that the cartoonist has spent hours on this, thinking up the idea, drawing the pictures, keeping it simple and clear, but including details so that his audience will understand exactly who or what is being shown. So, don't miss anything. Think about, who are these people? What is going on? Luckily, in this case, they have the countries they represent written on their hats. But even if they don't, the man is clearly meant to be a sausage-eating German, and the little boy is Belgian. The big man is trying to get through the gate labelled "No Thoroughfare", and the little boy is trying to stop him. This refers to events in 1914, when the German army invaded Belgium on its way to try to conquer France as part of the Schlieffen Plan. So, how useful is this cartoon for finding out about British attitudes to the war at the time? Remember, these cartoons aren't meant to be funny, but are popular with examiners because they have complex detail. Pause the tape here to answer. The time in question is given with the cartoon, August 1914. It shows in both the caption and in the action in the cartoon that Britain supported Belgium in its stand against the German invasion. In fact, it was the 1839 Treaty of Neutrality with Belgium that led Britain to declare war on Germany. The cartoon, therefore, is very useful in showing how the cartoonists saw the opening actions of the war and in explaining British reactions to this.
It will be useful to learn some of the characters that cartoonists used to symbolise certain countries. For example, John Bull for Britain, Uncle Sam for the USA, the bear for Russia. Visualise these certain characters with certain countries.
There's no such thing as a completely biased and useless source. What's interesting is what you can get out of the biased source. In source questions, remember to squeeze the evidence for meaning. In text sources, look at every phrase, every sentence to get what you can out of it. With photograph sources, look around the picture. Don't just be content with first impressions. And for cartoons, remember that the cartoonist has made an effort to include everything that's significant. See if you can pick up every point that the cartoonist makes. Squeeze the evidence.
That's the end of the section on usefulness of sources. Let's move on to the section on source comparison.